Hi, everyone. My name is Deeja. I am a senior cloud FinOps analyst at Datadog, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about how we drive cost optimization at scale at Datadog. So I'm going to quickly run through one of the large-scale company-wide programs that we did, so let's just jump in. Real quick, if you're unfamiliar with Datadog, we are an end-to-end observability platform, and as a member of the internal FinOps team, we really like to dog food our own products, so we use a lot of cloud cost management along with some of the other offerings, and so you'll see how we do that. I'm gonna throw it back a little bit. So in 2022-ish, ARM came available on AWS, and so we started testing that, doing almost like a POC with our top 25 services to see if this was a technology that we wanted to adopt. Turns out it would be extremely efficient for our workloads. And so in early 2023, our CTO said, all right, we've validated that this works. We've kind of worked through some of our roadblocks. We actually gave a lot of talks about this in 2022 at reInvent and KubeCon. And so he's like, let's do this. Let's migrate 100% of our production workloads on AWS to ARM by the end of the year. And we're like, great, we're at about 14% adoption, so we've got some work to do. So we put together a team of FinOps, technical program management, developer experience, capacity management, and we came together and we're like, what is this program going to look like? How are we going to make sure that we can shepherd thousands of engineers through this process in as frictionless manner as possible? So one of the things that I needed to do at the start was to figure out how much savings we could actually achieve. We did some back-of-the-napkin math, and we knew that we would save some money, but we needed a more detailed analysis. And so what I did there is I pulled all of the pricing data for our current instances, and I mapped those to target instances and pulled the pricing data for that. In this example here, you see an M5 to an M6. And normally you'd save about 20% if you were using public list prices. I added a little bit of conservatism to that because we all like to save more money than we initially forecast. It keeps finance happy, it makes the execs look good. So bumped that down to about 18%, and that's what I used as the basis for my estimates. Now, we took it a step further because we are a self-managed Kubernetes shop, and so oftentimes our engineers think about their workloads in terms of numbers of cores or millicores, and we decided to break the cost data out to align with that cost per core, savings per core concept. And we extended that throughout all of our instance types. You'll notice, though, that not every instance type had a like-for-like equivalent. And so I reached out to one team in particular that was using the majority of our M5Ns. Turns out they didn't need that extra networking capacity. They just thought they did. And so really they ended up moving to a mixture of M6G and C6G and saved even more money. So again, we like to save more money than we initially forecast. Now, how about tracking all of this, right? I mentioned there's thousands of people that needed to go through this. We have more than 25 employees in our engineering organization. We, globally speaking, we're multi-cloud. We run on tens of thousands of nodes. This is AWS in particular, but suffice to say there's a lot of moving pieces that we need to track, right? So we had our TPM, our technical program manager, devise this workflow that engineers were going to step through on their way to completion. And the very first step zero, if you will, was to file a card on our program's Jira board. We even put out a template so they could just copy and paste and fill out some stuff, again, to make it as frictionless as possible and increase the likelihood that they would actually complete this step for us. This is what that Jira flow looked like. So pretty straightforward. The cards would come in, we'd triage them, we'd get ETAs. We really just tracked this down to the quarter level at the time. And then if there were any blockers, which we'll talk about in a second, we had different categories so that we could track those exceptions as well. That was super important to this process. We had them test and then move to completion. So we'll step through this real quick. Step one was to make sure that they built their container images to be multi-architecture compatible. That was a super important step one. Our developer experience team was awesome, and they really helped unblock a lot of those mechanisms. We also had a wiki page. A lot of our shared repositories were multi-architecture by default, so there was oftentimes not that much work for those engineering teams. But if they did need to change something, we also provided a screenshot to show exactly what section of your values YAML that you needed to update in order to deploy to ARM. Now, once they did all that, then they deployed to staging. They did some testing. We said, wait about a week. Let us know if you run into any issues. And if so, please file an exception so that way we can track that as well. This is what that exception process looked like. So those exception cards, again, they'd come in, we'd triage them, the program team would review each and every card and either approve or reject on a case-by-case basis. We also categorized those exceptions, so that way we understood broadly what was really preventing that workload from completing the migration. Now, you'll notice the second largest category is deprecation. So this was only the savings being blocked, not the full cost. We'll come back to that later. Now, assuming there's no blockers, then you move on to the next step, and that's to do a capacity check. So a lot of our teams, they run large business critical workloads. So it's super important to make sure that we have enough capacity when we need it, where we need it, et cetera. So we have a capacity management team. They liaise with all of our cloud providers, and they'll manage things like on-demand capacity reservations, future capacity reservations. So if a team ran a large business critical workload, they would need to definitely complete this step, but for a lot of teams, it was just sort of a formality, like, yep, you're good to go. Now, all that's left is to deploy to production and then celebrate. Yay, you are done. So, super routine stuff, right? For many of us as practitioners, you estimate the cost, you devise a plan, you really try to get people to do this, but how exactly did we drive velocity? How did we get traction? Well, we roped in our executives. By doing that, we used a custom metric. It's one of the features of our platform. So we started with a baseline metric of CPU requests for our Kubernetes workloads. We then layered on top of that Workday data. So we have very high tagging coverage through a security initiative of things like team and service, because ownership is super important for us to track. So because we have those team tags so highly covered, let's say like more than 95, 96% of our infrastructure, we could then marry the Workday data to that team and get that visibility from the IC all the way up to the VP level. We also added in metadata from our Jira board and metadata from our container registry, so that way all of it was in one place. And we took that custom metric and we visualized it in a couple of dashboards, right? We're Datadog. So this is a snippet from our engineering dashboard. We had 4 main KPIs that we used to track this program. I'll zoom in. The first one was just an adoption metric. So what percentage of our cores was currently running on ARM. The second one was our readiness metric. So when we looked at the number of images that were ARM compatible, what was that percentage? And the gap between the first number in the green box and the second number in the purple box is really that gap that we were trying to close. So when our executives came to us, when, even directors and senior managers, and they said, how can we help? How's my team doing? We would point them to the difference between these two numbers and say, here's where you can help us close this gap. Now, we also tracked the exceptions and then our Jira board coverage as well. This is a snippet from our executive dashboard. This is built on that same data set, that same custom metric, but this is in terms of dollars instead of cores. Engineers really like to think about their workloads in terms of dollars, whereas leadership likes to look at dollars. So we created a view for them. And the way that this kind of is broken out, I'm going to walk through this real quick. So let's say I'm a VP, I want to plug in my name and see what's the status. Green part's done, yellow part is what remains. And we further broke that out in terms of engineering left, right? So stuff that was already ARM enabled and just had not yet been migrated, super easy, relatively speaking. If we still needed to create that ARM compatible container image, that was more of a medium lift, but still doable. And so this was the total addressable scope, and where we encourage our VPs to really provide support for their engineering teams. The exceptions were a much harder lift because of dependencies or waiting for the right type of ARM instance to become available, or maybe things are being deprecated, and so that was like a whole nother work stream. Now, all this to say, by the end of the year, we were at about a 61% adoption rate, which we were happy with. We had achieved a good amount of savings in a relatively short amount of time. We also tracked all of these exceptions. So these two combined gave us about an 82% completion rate, if you will, which we were pretty pleased with. Now, here's an example, real dollars, of one service that decided to run on a mix of ARM and x86. They were able to achieve a savings of about 13% on their average daily spend. This is another example of a team that adopted ARM at a higher rate. They actually achieved about a 29% reduction in their average daily rate. And these are screenshots from our cloud cost management product. This is great because you can just have the engineers take a widget of their costs and put it into their dashboards where they're already monitoring all of their other SLIs, and it just kind of fits in nicely where they're already monitoring their workloads. Now, since then, we've tracked those deprecations to near completion. This is over the course of 2024, and this is important for our team to track because we feed this data back into our forecasting, into our commitments purchasing strategy, and so it's really important to understand how these things are trending. We also communicate with the teams, but sometimes deadlines shift, and so it's really good to also monitor the daily spend of these things as well. In case you're curious, today our ARM adoption rate is above 70%, like 70, this says 72. We've pushed it a little bit higher since then. I just checked the other day and we're a little more like 74.5%. We've also reduced those exceptions down to a little less than 14%. So making progress, but it's a journey. We're constantly evolving. And again, this is not a requirement. And sometimes teams do prefer to kind of run on a mix, or maybe they have a failover incident or a scale-up incident. And so we understand that 100 is a nice target, but it may just be like a constant work in progress. Now, one other thing that's been really awesome is the cloud cost management product has evolved alongside with us, and they now have a recommendations feature, which takes a lot of load off of our team because, again, I mentioned that high tagging coverage. The teams can actually go and they can input the name of their app or their team and get a bunch of recommendations. And then we have a Jira integration, so they can just auto-create a card, and it goes right to a centrally managed board that my team reviews and validates. So really taken a lot of the heavy lifting out of it. We also now have that Workday data fully integrated into our cloud cost data. So if we wanted to still have the executives take a look, they could actually filter this by their name and see all of the recommendations as well. So that's been awesome to have. If I could leave you guys with just a few takeaways, when you're thinking about running a large-scale cost optimization project, it's really important to iterate early and often in the beginning. This is a core principle of Datadog, and sometimes your early ideas are good, but maybe they could be better. Maybe someone from another team has a great idea. Maybe you're a FinOps party of one, or maybe you're a part-time FinOps person. So really reaching out into your organization and collaborating is going to go a long way with making a better program. Also, executive buy-in. It's super important to get executive buy-in when you're doing these large-scale programs. I would almost say it's hard to do one without executive buy-in. So if your execs aren't on board, estimate the savings, take that number to them. I challenge you to find an executive who says, no, I don't want to save money. and then track everything. Part of what made this program successful and part of how we achieved the velocity was just to make sure that we made all of that work visible and delivered it in a timely manner. If you have more questions, we have a bunch of our product people here at our booth. They would love to give you a demo. You can also schedule a meeting if you want to take a deeper dive. You can also find me on the FinOps Foundation Slack. It's about the only social media I check. So,
any questions?
Is pricing still based on a number of courses?
Pricing model.
Oh, we do still break it out in number of cores. My team also tracks by at the node level, but oftentimes our engineers will say, well, we don't actually know how many nodes we're running on, but we know how many cores we're requesting. So yeah, we do still kind of use that quite a bit.
Any other questions? All right, if you have any questions later, you can find Deeja where?
On the FinOps Foundation Slack.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. For more FinOps X 2025 content, go check out our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and leave comments and questions for all of our wonderful speakers. We appreciate your support.